There are often stories in which victims, after their own death, return to the world of the living to take revenge on their perpetrator. That probably only happens in movies, you will say. Well, that's true, but in life there are stories that are much more interesting than in the cinema. Stories that are so interesting that directors go to great lengths to make a film based on real life. Just such a story you will hear today. Because Judy practically rose from the grave to punish her abuser and help other women. When Bonnie and Daniel entered the ward, they felt like they were about to be sick. On the bed lay a bandaged body. It had almost no skin left, no ears, and only fingers on one hand. At first glance, they thought the nurse had done something wrong. According to the doctors, Judy only had a few hours to live, because with such injuries, death is practically pre-programmed. Today's story shows one of the most incredible displays of human strength ever seen. This woman's life was a series of trials, one of which ended very tragically. But on the threshold between life and death, Judy Malinowski managed to change the justice system in her state. Judy was born on August 26, 1983 in Columbus, Ohio. There she also spent her childhood with her brother Patrick and her sister Danielle. Before Judy was born, her mother had several unsuccessful pregnancies, so the girl's birth was a long-awaited miracle for her parents. Since Judy was the oldest child, it was her responsibility to look after the younger children. She adored Danielle and Patrick. All three were not only siblings, but also close friends. Judy also had a special relationship with her mother, who treated her eldest daughter like a friend. During her school years, Judy excelled in everything. She was good at school, made many friends, and was one of the most popular in her class. Her energy and charisma did not go unnoticed. The high school student won several beauty pageants and was even crowned Miss New Albany. At her prom, she was elected prom queen. After graduating from high school, Judy continued her studies at Ohio State University. She dreamed of teaching at this school. She told her mother about her plans for her life. She wanted to lead a simple, quiet, and peaceful life, find a job after university, and settle down in a nice little house with a loving husband and children. She spent most of her free time not at youth parties, but volunteering in a nursing home. She wanted her career to take the path of helping others, but soon she needed help herself. Her idyllic world was plunged into chaos. A great tragedy occurred in Judy's life. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. In the first few months, it seemed as if life was over and as if she was destined to die young. The young woman fought seriously for her own health and for the beautiful future she dreamed of. During this time, there was much to regret, to cry about, and to lament fate, but in the end, the hard battle was won. Amazingly, Judy managed to beat the cancer. Overcoming the terrible illness strongly influenced the student's character. She realized she could do what most people could not. And now she had to be happy and live the rest of her life as she had dreamed as a child, in love and harmony. When Judy turned 21, she met a man named Ron. The young people fell in love at first sight and soon married. They had two beautiful daughters, Kyne and Madison. Judy thanked God for her happiness. The illness had no effect on the birth of the children. Both babies were healthy. The young woman's childhood dreams slowly began to come true. Unfortunately, someone from above apparently decided that Judy had not yet experienced enough in her life. When she was pregnant with her second daughter, Madison, she learned that her husband was having an affair on the side. This news completely devastated the woman. When Madison was born, the relationship with her husband was finally broken and the couple divorced. Around the same time, Judy suffered a relapse. The cancer returned with renewed force. At this point, there was only one solution to the problem: a full hysterectomy, a gynecological operation to remove the uterus. The young 25-year-old woman was heartbroken. She didn't understand why life was so unfair to her. She had dealt with the illness before and won. Why did she have to go through it again now? To get rid of the illness, Judy agreed to an operation which was quite successful. It seemed she could celebrate a victory a second time. But the operation to remove her uterus left her with such severe pain that only prescription painkillers could help her continue living. The country was in an opioid crisis at that time. Strong medications were prescribed in excessive doses. This led to many people becoming addicted to prescription drugs. Judy happened to be one of them. After the operation, the pain never subsided, and if she refused to take the pills, it became unbearable. The constant use of strong painkillers led to addiction, and the medications no longer worked. Either higher doses or even stronger medications were required. Judy had taken the pills for so long until her health insurance no longer covered the treatment costs. This meant that the woman could no longer afford the prescription drugs. As a result, she turned to illegal substances. In fact, she became addicted to illegal substances that relieved her pain even a little. It went so far that Judy's life completely fell apart. The pills cost a lot of money, and relationships with family and friends became increasingly strained. Addiction to controlled substances also meant that it became difficult for Judy to care for her daughters. It was good that the family stepped in. The eldest, Kyne, was taken in by her grandmother Bonnie, and Madison was taken in by her Aunt Danielle, Judy's own sister. Although relations with relatives were sometimes strained due to the young woman's addiction, they never gave up on Judy, as they didn't want her to go through this ordeal alone. The family did everything they could to help her during this difficult time. Finally, Judy realized that her addiction was part of her impulsive decisions that affected not only herself but also her children. This forced Judy to come to her senses. Rehab followed to get clean and get her life back on track. It was hard, but Judy Malinowski persevered. She simply took it as another fight for her own future, and once again the woman triumphed. She showed such drive that her life changed dramatically after rehab. Judy finally returned to her former happy and cheerful state. The addiction was now completely under control. She managed to get back on her feet, find an apartment and a job, and see her daughters again. She continued to attend meetings for addicts, but she felt empowered to finally lead a normal life again. Malinowski now had the quiet, peaceful, and happy life she had always dreamed of. It lasted a few years, and then everything collapsed again, because Judy's ordeal was not over yet. It all started with a man named Michael Slager. At the age of 31, Judy met a man who contacted her via social media. They had crossed paths once before at an acquaintance's place when the woman was still married, but she hadn't paid him any attention then. In 2014, Michael happened to see a picture of Malinowski online and began to get her attention in every conceivable way. He commented on her posts, liked her photos, and wrote her personal messages. A kind of online friendship developed between the two until Michael confessed his feelings to her some time later. The man said he liked Judy at first sight, but then she was married and he didn't dare to approach her. He tried to forget her but happened to come across her photo on social media, visited the page, and found out that the woman's heart was free. Michael showered Malinowski with compliments and said exactly the words she wanted to hear. He was attentive, considerate, loving, promised to give her peace, tranquility, and love, in short. He used all his charm to win her heart. It was in April 2015, just a few months after they had started chatting via social media, Malinowski changed her status and wrote that she was in a relationship with Michael Slager. Michael's charm worked. From that point on, everything went downhill. What Judy didn't know was that her new chosen one had an extensive criminal record. When Michael met Judy, he had already been convicted of theft, violence, illegal carrying of a weapon, assault, forced sexual intercourse, threats, false reporting to the police, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and so on. The list of his convictions could go on for a very long time. It became clear that the law meant nothing to him. Michael was a career criminal, but somehow he managed to hide this from his new girlfriend. Although Judy's mother Bonnie knew from the first meeting that something was wrong with this man, she couldn't even explain why she didn't like him. But Michael used manipulation and told Judy's mother not to judge Michael for his tattoos and some character traits, because even Jesus forgave people their sins. Bonnie backed off and decided it was her daughter's life. Soon Michael moved into Malinowski's apartment and immediately felt like the master of the house. This happened just a few weeks after Judy had changed the status on her social media page. His obsession and his attempts to control began to manifest in every little thing. Michael wanted to control every aspect of Judy's life, who no longer had any say. For example, Malinowski was not allowed to leave her apartment without Michael's permission. She was only allowed to go outside accompanied by him. Slager installed a tracking device on Judy's phone, and then the abuse and physical assaults began. There was another thing Michael did to completely suppress and destroy Judy's will. He found out that her life had been hell not too long ago and she had struggled with her addiction. Although Judy had all but conquered it by this point, Michael decided to use his girlfriend's weakness to his advantage. He wanted her to be weak, vulnerable, and completely dependent on him. To put his plan into action, Slager bought a batch of illegal substances while actively encouraging the woman to relapse. If Malinowski became addicted to illegal substances again, she would be completely at his mercy. Michael could use it against her at any time. He himself took nothing. He was not a dealer. He just bought pills on the street and spent his own money. As strong as Judy's character was, it's not for nothing they say that addiction haunts you for life. And you have to work hard not to relapse. In the following weeks, Slager continued to burden her with manipulation, insults, and guilt. One day, Judy snapped. She became addicted to illegal substances again, and her life went downhill. Meanwhile, Michael created a false impression of his role. He called Judy's mother and complained that her daughter was high again, that she was out of control, taking more and more every day, squandering her money, and was interested in nothing but another dose. Bonnie believed her daughter's boyfriend and felt sorry for him because she thought he was just a hostage of the situation. Slager seemed to her almost like a saint, carrying a heavy burden of responsibility for the wayward daughter. The woman even gave him some money so he could pay the bills, groceries, and other necessities. But Michael spent it to buy another dose for Judy. It seemed as if this man had appeared out of nowhere just to ruin Malinowski's already difficult life. One day he called Bonnie and said that her daughter had taken so much of the illegal substance that she had passed out. The woman panicked and called emergency services and reported an overdose. The doctors who arrived found that Judy was perfectly fine. Michael convinced them it was an overdose, but Judy had already regained consciousness. This was done intentionally so that Malinowski's medical record would show an entry for an emergency call due to a suspected overdose. Slager did everything he could to make those around him believe that Judy herself was the problem. He portrayed her as being completely down due to an overdose, which justified his physical abuse and violence. Michael began to beat Malinowski for the slightest offense. Her body was covered in bruises, and once he almost choked her. Judy was so intimidated that she was afraid to turn to the authorities. But one day she had enough and she wanted to report the domestic violence. But thanks to his manipulations, the authorities simply didn't believe Judy. Before them stood an addicted woman accusing a sober man who was taking care of her. That's how it looked in the eyes of the police. They didn't take Judy seriously and thought she was just making it all up. Michael looked like a good man who was trying to help his girlfriend with her addiction. That's why Slager created situations from the beginning so that people would later believe Malinowski had lost her mind and couldn't be trusted. His devious plan worked. The bullying continued until Judy persuaded her mother to help her kick Michael out of the apartment. But all of Bonnie's attempts failed because Michael wouldn't go anywhere. Help from the authorities was not even dreamed of. At this point, Judy had no choice but to run away herself. She slept at her mother's and friends' places, rented hotel rooms, and tried to stay away from Michael. She was completely powerless against him. But whenever Malinowski ran away from the apartment, Slager would call the police and report her missing. The police officers found the woman and brought her back. Once Judy took Michael's car to get away from him, but he immediately reported it stolen, and the woman was warned by the authorities. Every time she came home, the man let her know that the police were on his side and that Judy could do nothing about it. He warned her that one day he would get tired of putting up with her escapades, and if Malinowski decided to leave him, he would simply kill her. No threat could intimidate Judy because life with Michael was worse than death for her. So she didn't want to give up the fight. Her last desperate plan was to go to rehab, get clean, and get her life back on track. It was a safe place where Michael couldn't get to her. She would no longer be dependent on him since the man supplied her with drugs. Now she could overcome the addiction and start anew. Unfortunately, Judy wouldn't even be able to go to a rehab clinic, as Slager made one of his most violent threats come true. This would change the life of the woman and her entire family forever. On August 2, 2015, 4 months after the relationship began, Malinowski was about to put her plan to go into rehab into action. At this time, her 2 daughters were living with their grandmother, so the 2 were safe. Judy informed Michael of her decision, as he otherwise simply wouldn't allow her to leave the apartment. Surprisingly, the man agreed and even offered to take her to the hospital himself. So Judy and Michael drove to the Parkside Rehabilitation Center, which was near Columbus, Ohio. On the way there, however, the woman asked for some time to mentally prepare herself. She persuaded Slager to drive her to her mother's house so she could say goodbye to her daughters before they parted ways. Michael stopped the car and they drove to a gas station to buy drinks. On the way there, a heated argument broke out between the 2, which continued at the gas station. Judy was fed up with the whole thing. She wanted at least a few minutes alone, so she got out of the car and walked across the parking lot. Michael started the truck and followed her. All her movements were recorded by the surveillance cameras. When he caught up with Judy, the man demanded she get into the vehicle. They started arguing again. When the situation finally became heated, Malinowski spat soda from the cup she was holding in her boyfriend's face. This incident enraged Michael so much that he went back to his car, pulled out a gas can, and poured its contents over Judy. He drenched her from head to toe and said this was a reaction to her antics. The woman felt the gasoline get into her eyes, ears, nose, and throat. Judy started to choke. She couldn't see anything and was completely disoriented. She stumbled, fell onto the sidewalk, and begged Michael to stop. But in his eyes was a cold, dead look. He didn't care what Judy said or how she felt. The only thing he wanted was to inflict as much pain and suffering on her as possible. Then the man went back to the car, took a lighter, and held it in front of Malinowski's face. Judy was horrified. She cried and repeatedly begged Michael not to do it, promising to meet all his demands and never to anger him again. But he quietly lit a lighter and touched her clothes with the flame. The fire engulfed the fuel-soaked clothes in an instant. The woman began to roll on the ground to put out the flames. She looked like a red fireball. Every part of her body was in flames. It felt to Judy as if 1,000 glowing needles were being stuck under her skin simultaneously. And Michael stood there watching as his girlfriend burned alive. His eyes at that moment were black, cold, and soulless. He watched, satisfied with what he had done. The craziest part was that this all happened in broad daylight and under the eyes of surveillance cameras. Slager probably thought he was above the law and could do whatever he wanted. There were also people in the parking lot. They rushed to Judy to help her put out the flames. A man ran towards her and yelled at Michael to do something instead of just standing there. When he finally gave in to the pressure, Slager finally got a fire extinguisher from the car and extinguished the flames on Judy. Several people immediately called emergency services and reported that a man had set his girlfriend on fire. Paramedics and police officers soon arrived on the scene. Incredibly, Judy was still alive. She was taken to the hospital, and the police were busy investigating the circumstances. Michael described the incident as an accident. He claimed Judy had spilled gasoline on herself while refueling her car and then went to the back of the gas station to smoke. It looked as if the entire fire had been started by an accidental spark from a cigarette. When the family received a call from the Ohio State University Hospital saying Judy had had an accident and was on life support, they were not told over the phone what had really happened. Mother Bonnie and sister Danielle, understanding nothing, rushed to the clinic. What they saw horrified them. Nothing could have prepared them for what they would see upon arrival at the hospital. Mother and daughter even wondered if they had come to the right room, but it was indeed Judy lying there before them. 99% of her body was covered with 3rd and 4th degree burns. Her skin was charred, her hair was burned off, as were her ears. Judy had lost several fingers, her clothes were practically embedded in her skin, and her face was completely unrecognizable. It was the worst thing they had ever seen. At this point, Malinowski had already been placed in a medically induced coma. Her chances of survival were nil. The doctors did not expect the woman to live for more than a few hours. Among doctors who treat burn victims, there is a mortality equation used to estimate the probability that a victim will die from their injuries. This calculation includes the percentage of burns on the body and the patient's age. According to the nurse who cared for Malinowski, the probability of death in her case was 110%. Meanwhile, investigators questioned Michael to get the truth about the incident out of him. At first, the man stubbornly refused to admit his guilt, but the investigators had already seen video footage from the gas station and knew that Michael had doused Judy with gasoline. When he was informed of this, he changed his story, but it was still far from the truth. Slager said it was all an accident. He and Malinowski had a small argument and the woman threw soda in his face. He then jokingly decided to douse her with gasoline. Since she ruined his clothes, he did the same to hers. Then Judy allegedly wanted to smoke, so he handed her a lighter. According to him, the clothes accidentally caught fire. His words were still doubtful. The only person who could confirm or deny his statement was Judy Malinowski herself. But at that moment, she was sedated, barely clinging to life, and was unresponsive. Her answers would determine whether Slager could be charged. Therefore, after consulting with the doctors, it was decided to bring the victim out of the coma to clarify the situation. It was extremely risky, but the time frame was hours. That's how long Judy's doctors had predicted she had. Given her condition, no one knew if the plan would work if the woman could hear them. After all, her ears had been severely damaged in the fire. Nevertheless, Judy was brought out of anesthesia. She made it clear that she could hear the questions and was able to answer them. The investigators asked questions, and Malinowski nodded yes or no. She was able to confirm that it was Michael who had intentionally doused her with gasoline and then set her on fire. This interrogation on the brink of death showed Judy, who was in excruciating pain, trying to tell the police the truth about the incident at the gas station. After this questioning, the doctors continued treatment, although they knew Judy had at most a few more hours to live. But hours turned into days, days into weeks, and Judy kept fighting. Her doctors were amazed she was still alive. Of course, the woman was in a terrible condition. She was wrapped in dressings and bandages from head to toe, which had to be changed twice a day. It was unbearably painful. Her burned skin bled and festered, and the bandages stuck. To change them, Judy had to endure excruciating pain every time. She couldn't move and had breathing problems, so it was decided to put her back into a medically induced coma, which lasted for 7 months. During this time, she had to undergo about 60 operations, many of which were unsuccessful. Her arm was amputated because it was burned to the bone, and she received skin grafts. Once she almost died on the operating table. While Judy fought for her life every day, Slager sat in jail awaiting his trial. He was charged with aggravated arson and assault, but Michael still denied doing anything intentionally. He probably even sat in a prison cell thinking that Judy would never recover and testify against him. And although it sounds terrible, the investigators were also waiting for Judy to die so they could charge Slager with murder. While the authorities worked on the investigation, the woman lay in a coma for months. Her life hung in the balance. The lead investigator no longer hoped to hear that Malinowski had regained consciousness and was ready to testify. He was very surprised when he received the call from the hospital. This was the first case with a likely fatal outcome where the investigator would meet and speak with the victim. Judy could only answer questions in a whisper. She knew it depended on her whether the man who had maimed her would go to prison or continue to ruin other women's lives. When Malinowski saw herself in the mirror 2 months later, she swore to herself that she would find the strength to seek justice. Michael's defense team said that it would be much worse for Slager in the long run if he went to trial and Judy testified against him. The jury would immediately develop hatred and anger towards him, and if Judy died from her injuries in the future, he could be held responsible for her death. Michael himself and his defense team did not want to allow that, so he changed his plea from not guilty to a plea of no contest. There was no trial since he did not contest his guilt. He received the maximum sentence for aggravated assault and arson, that is, 11 years in prison. Although this was the maximum sentence for such a crime, Judy was heartbroken. All she wanted was justice. The woman wanted her voice to be heard, but also felt that Michael had silenced her once again. Malinowski, however, did not give up. She kept fighting as long as she was alive. Even in her vulnerable state, it was no longer so much about justice for herself, but about protecting other women from similar monsters. Judy wanted to use her situation and what she had been through to help future victims who were in the same situation as her. Judy Malinowski spent months in a hospital bed. All that time, with the help of her family, she advocated for a change in the criminal justice system. The woman advocated for a new law that provides for a maximum penalty for intentional assault. Although Judy couldn't change Michael's sentence, she ran this campaign for future victims by recording messages directly from the hospital. She experienced the unbearable pain caused by the man she had fallen in love with and fought for justice for others. In January 2017, her health deteriorated rapidly. Doctors and relatives felt that Judy's strength was fading, and she was tired of fighting. At this point, the prosecution realized that they needed to record Malinowski's testimony to be able to prosecute a case of intentional homicide later. Previously, the prosecution team, like Judy, had been angered by Slager's lenient sentence, so they approached her to record her testimony for a possible trial regarding her death. This had never happened before. They had to try to ensure that Malinowski's story would help in the future to punish the man who had ruined her life. The prosecutors didn't fully understand how this would work. They had to deal with the complexities of the court system to foresee the legality of their actions in the future. At that time, there was no case in the United States in which a victim of a fatal crime had testified in their own murder trial. Judy's condition worsened day by day. However, the painkillers she was taking had to be significantly reduced to ensure her mental clarity during her testimony. Yet she agreed. Judy in particular had repeatedly proven that she was a fighter and capable of breaking the system. The prosecution gave Malinowski the opportunity to record her testimony on video before her death. It was expected that these recordings would be shown at her trial for her murder. To prepare for these difficult recordings, the woman decided to fight the pain herself and completely stop taking painkillers so that Slager's defense could not accuse her of any incapacities. For several weeks, she got used to living without pills. When Judy succeeded in this and her condition stabilized, she was finally ready to tell her tragic story. The worst part was that Michael asked to sit in the same room next to Judy during the questioning. He had the right to confront the person accusing him of assault face to face. But fortunately, the judge saw this as an intimidation tactic, and Slager's request was denied. Instead, medical personnel were kept at Judy's side. Family members were also excluded from the room. Malinowski was connected via video call and was sworn in directly in her hospital bed. She was to be questioned by both sides, prosecution and defense. It was all like a routine interrogation, except for the fact that Judy was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life, and telling a story that would only see justice after her death. The woman, damaged by the fire, gathered all her willpower and was able to recall the events of that tragic day. She remembered her thoughts at that moment. Judy was sure she was going to die, so she simply prayed to Jesus to forgive her sins and take care of her children. After that, she lost consciousness and only woke up again in the hospital. Malinowski then described what it was like to be burned alive. She wanted to make it clear that it was not an accident but an intentional act. When one of Michael's lawyers cross-examined her, he reminded Judy of her addiction, how she had allegedly stolen a car from her boyfriend, and the accidental overdose when emergency services had to be called. The lawyer tried to portray Malinowski's story as unreliable and questioned whether she had provoked Michael that day. He wanted to question her cognitive abilities, as the woman's condition left much to be desired. But that was precisely why Judy had endured the severe pain and refused to take her medication. Throughout the cross-examination, she showed incredible strength and courage and never once wavered from her conviction. After the video testimony, Judy had finally achieved what she had endured all the pain for and could now rest in peace. It had taken a lot of strength for her to endure this ordeal, which noticeably affected her well-being. No one knew how long she would live after such a strain. In June 2017, after almost 2 years of daily struggle, Judy made the decision to move into hospice care. On June 27, 2017, days after the tragedy, Judy Malinowski passed away at the age of 33. By her side was her mother Bonnie, who supported her unfortunate daughter until the very end. Almost a year later, in July 2018, Michael Slager was finally brought to trial for the massacre of Judy. The man wanted to plead not guilty. At the preliminary hearing after Judy's testimony in court, however, Michael's lawyer advised him to accept a deal to avoid the death penalty. Slager finally agreed to the deal and pleaded guilty in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It turned out that this was exactly what Judy Malinowski had demanded before her death. She wanted Michael to receive a life sentence because the death penalty would have been too lenient a punishment for him compared to what she had gone through in the last 2 years. Judy hoped that this man, while sitting behind bars, would reflect on his actions and realize the gravity of his guilt. After the case was closed, the family founded the Judy Foundation, which supports victims of domestic violence and addicts. Judy's incredible efforts were not in vain. In the summer of 2017, the state of Ohio passed a new law called Judy's Law, which included all the changes Malinowski had called for. Judy's 2 daughters, who were 13 years old at the time, attended the bill-signing event. The girls sat next to the state governor as he signed the law. In a room full of reporters, the younger daughter described her mother as brave, while the older daughter added that at least her mother had not suffered in vain. Judy's law was passed by the state senate the day after her death. Thanks for watching and take care.